The city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Sarah Matthews sat on the rooftop terrace of the downtown restaurant, her fingers wrapped around a glass of untouched wine. The evening breeze carried the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of jasmine from the potted plants that lined the restaurant's edge. She checked her phone again. 7:45. He was already 15 minutes late. Sarah had built her technology company from nothing. At 32, she was known throughout the city as the CEO who never backed down from a challenge. Board meetings, investor pitches, corporate takeovers, she handled them all with the same cool confidence that had made her a legend in the business world. But tonight, sitting alone at a table for two, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: vulnerable. The accident had changed everything 3 years ago. One moment she was driving home from a late meeting, the next she was waking up in a hospital bed, learning that her legs would never work again. The doctors spoke in gentle tones about adaptation and mobility aids. The physical therapy was grueling. But the hardest part wasn't learning to navigate the world from her wheelchair. It was watching people's reactions change. Some looked at her with pity. Others with awkward discomfort. Business partners who once treated her as an equal now spoke louder, as if her hearing had been affected too. Dating had become a minefield of well-meaning but painful encounters. Men who seemed interested until they saw her wheelchair. Others who were too interested, treating her disability like some kind of puzzle to solve. After 2 years of disappointing dates, Sarah had given up entirely. Her assistant Emma had finally worn her down after months of gentle persuasion. Just one dinner, Emma had pleaded. My cousin Jake knows this guy from his auto shop. He's nice, he's single, and he doesn't know anything about your company or your situation. Just a regular guy. Sarah had agreed mostly to stop Emma's constant matchmaking attempts. Now, as the minutes ticked by, she wondered if this was the universe's way of telling her to stick to her original plan of staying single. A commotion near the elevator caught her attention. The maitre d' was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to a tall man in dark jeans and a button-down shirt. The man looked around the terrace with obvious confusion, his dark hair slightly messy as if he'd been running his hands through it. Sarah recognized the signs of someone dealing with a reservation mix-up. She'd seen it countless times during business dinners. Part of her hoped this was her date, running late due to circumstances beyond his control. The other part of her prepared for disappointment. The man approached her table hesitantly. He was broader than she'd expected, with calloused hands and the kind of tan that came from working outdoors. There was something refreshingly unpretentious about him, from his slightly scuffed boots to the way he carried himself without any of the polished confidence she was used to in her professional circle. Sarah, he asked, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. She nodded, managing a small smile. You must be David. I am, and I'm really sorry I'm late. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. The reservations got mixed up somehow. They had me down for next Tuesday, and it took 20 minutes to sort out. He paused, studying her face. You probably thought I stood you up. The thought crossed my mind, Sarah admitted. There was something disarming about his directness. No smooth excuses or elaborate apologies. Just honest acknowledgement of the situation. David signaled the waiter for a menu. I should probably mention that I have no idea what I'm doing here. I mean, with this whole setup thing. Emma said you were successful and smart, and I figured that probably meant you were way out of my league. Then I got here and saw this place, and now I'm pretty sure I'm right. Sarah found herself genuinely smiling for the first time all evening. What do you do, David? I'm a mechanic. I own a small shop about 20 minutes from here. We mostly do regular maintenance, some restoration work on classic cars. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. He looked around the elegant terrace. This is definitely not my usual dinner spot. I was thinking more along the lines of the diner down the street from my shop. There was no shame in his voice, no defensiveness. Just matter-of-fact honesty. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath, waiting for him to notice her wheelchair and for his demeanor to shift. But his attention remained focused on her face, on their conversation. What kind of restoration work? She asked. David's eyes lit up. All kinds, really. Last month I finished a 1967 Mustang that had been sitting in someone's garage for 30 years. The owner's father had bought it new, and after he passed away, she wanted to get it running again. It took 4 months, but when we fired up that engine. He trailed off, suddenly looking embarrassed. Sorry, I get a little carried away talking about cars. Don't apologize. It's nice to hear someone talk about something they're passionate about. The waiter appeared with David's menu and took their orders. As they waited for their food, the conversation flowed more easily than Sarah had expected. David asked about her work, and she found herself giving him the simplified version she usually reserved for people outside the tech industry. "So you started the company yourself?" David asked after she finished explaining her software business. 7 years ago. It was just me and one programmer working out of my apartment." Sarah paused, remembering those early days. They felt like a lifetime ago now. "We developed software that helps small businesses manage their inventory and customer data. Nothing revolutionary, but it works well, and word spread." "That's impressive. I can barely manage my own inventory system, and it's just parts for cars." David smiled. "How many people work for you now?" 123. David whistled softly. "That's incredible. You must be proud of what you've built." Sarah was surprised by the simple admiration in his voice. No probing questions about valuation or expansion plans. No networking attempts or subtle pitches for his own business needs. Just genuine respect for her accomplishments. Their food arrived, and they continued talking. David told her about growing up in a small town 2 hours north, learning about engines from his father, who'd run the local garage for 30 years. Sarah shared stories about the early days of her company, the 18-hour days and the constant uncertainty about whether they'd make payroll each month. "What made you want to start your own business?" David asked, cutting into his steak. Sarah considered the question. "Control, I think. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that would last. And I didn't want to spend my life making someone else's dream come true." "I get that. That's why I bought the shop from my old boss when he retired. I could have kept working for someone else, but there's something about having your own place, making your own decisions." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. David didn't try to impress her with stories of his own success or connections. He didn't ask probing questions about her personal life or make assumptions about what she wanted to hear. He simply listened, responded honestly, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. The conversation eventually turned to hobbies and interests outside of work. David mentioned his weekend hiking trips and his ongoing project of restoring a motorcycle in his spare time. Sarah talked about her love of reading and the pottery classes she'd recently started taking. "Pottery?" David asked, his eyebrows raising slightly. "That's not what I would have expected from a CEO." "What would you have expected?" "I don't know. Golf, maybe. Networking events. Wine tasting." Sarah laughed. "I tried golf once. I was terrible at it. The pottery is actually really relaxing. There's something meditative about working with clay, shaping something with your hands." "That makes sense. I get the same feeling working on engines. When everything else is complicated, there's something satisfying about a problem you can actually solve with your hands." As they talked, Sarah realized she had been unconsciously bracing herself all evening for the moment when David would notice her wheelchair and the conversation would shift. She'd become so used to that moment of recognition, followed by either awkward questions or overly careful politeness. But as the evening wore on, it became clear that David had noticed and simply didn't care. His attention remained focused on their conversation, on learning about her thoughts and experiences rather than her physical situation. When the waiter brought the check, David insisted on paying despite Sarah's protests. "Emma set this up," he said. "That makes me responsible for dinner. Besides, I asked you out, even if it was through a mutual friend." They took the elevator down to street level together. Sarah had driven herself, her car equipped with hand controls that allowed her to operate the gas and brake with her hands. She'd become fiercely independent about transportation, preferring to maintain control over her own schedule and mobility. David walked with her to her car, a sleek sedan parked in a handicapped space near the restaurant entrance. This was often the moment when dates became awkward, when people didn't know what to do or say. "I had a really good time tonight," David said as they reached her car. "I know this was Emma's idea, but I'd like to see you again, if you're interested." Sarah looked up at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "You would?" "Yeah, I would. You're interesting to talk to, and you laugh at my terrible jokes. Plus, I have a feeling there are a lot more stories I'd like to hear." "I'd like that too," Sarah said, and realized she meant it completely. David smiled and pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number?" They exchanged contact information, and David waited while Sarah transferred from her wheelchair to the driver's seat of her car. He didn't hover or offer help unless asked, another small gesture that Sarah appreciated more than he probably realized. "Drive safely," he said as she started the engine. "You too." Sarah drove home through the quiet city streets, replaying the evening in her mind. For the first time in 3 years, she had enjoyed a date without feeling like she was performing or trying to prove something. David had seen her as a person first, everything else second. Her phone buzzed with a text message as she pulled into her driveway. David had sent a simple message, "Thanks for a great evening. Looking forward to that second date." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "Me too." Over the next few weeks, they began seeing each other regularly. David took her to places she'd never been, a classic car show, a small family-owned restaurant that served the best barbecue in the state, a jazz club where the music was so good that conversation became secondary to simply listening together. Sarah introduced David to her world as well. They attended a gallery opening where one of Sarah's friends was displaying her photography. They went to a wine tasting that Sarah had been curious about but had never attended alone. What struck Sarah most about these experiences was how natural they felt. David was curious about her interests without pretending to share them all. He asked thoughtful questions at the gallery and admitted when he didn't understand a particular piece of art. At the wine tasting, he confessed that he couldn't tell the difference between a $20 bottle and a $100 bottle, but he enjoyed learning about the process. In return, Sarah found herself genuinely interested in David's work and passions. She visited his shop one Saturday afternoon and watched him work on the motorcycle he was restoring. His hands moved with practiced confidence as he explained the intricacies of the engine, the challenges of finding original parts, the satisfaction of bringing something back to life. "It's like solving a puzzle," he explained as he adjusted something in the carburetor. "Every piece has to fit exactly right, and when it all comes together, you get this beautiful machine that can take you anywhere." Sarah understood the appeal. There was something honest about the work, something tangible about the results. In her software business, success was often measured in abstract metrics, user engagement, quarterly growth, market penetration. But David's work had immediate, visible results. A car that wouldn't start suddenly roared to life. A classic vehicle that had been neglected for decades became beautiful and functional again. One evening, about 6 weeks after their first date, they were having dinner at Sarah's house. She had cooked, something she rarely did but had wanted to try. The meal was simple: grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, rice, but David complimented it as if she'd prepared a gourmet feast. "I should probably tell you something," Sarah said as they finished eating. David looked up from his plate, suddenly alert. "Okay, when Emma set us up, I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the idea. I'd pretty much given up on dating. Because of work." Sarah hesitated. This was the conversation she'd been both dreading and anticipating for weeks. Partly because of work, but mainly because. She gestured toward her wheelchair. "This changes things for people. Not always in ways they expect or want to deal with." David was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "You mean other guys you've dated had problems with it? Some couldn't handle it at all. Others wanted to handle it too much, if that makes sense. They either saw me as broken or as some kind of inspiration. Neither one felt like they were seeing me. That's their loss," David said simply. "You really don't mind the wheelchair, the limitations?" David leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this for weeks, wondering when you were going to bring it up. You want to know what I see when I look at you?" She nodded. "I see someone who built a successful company from nothing. Someone who's smart and funny and doesn't take herself too seriously. Someone who tried to cook dinner for me even though she admits she's terrible in the kitchen." He paused. "I see someone I'm falling for pretty hard, and that scares me a lot more than a wheelchair ever could." Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "You're falling for me?" "Yeah, I am. Is that okay?" Instead of answering with words, Sarah leaned forward and kissed him. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like possibility and hope and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. 6 months later, they were engaged. David proposed at his shop, with the restored motorcycle gleaming in the background and motor oil under his fingernails. It wasn't the romantic setting Sarah might have imagined, but it was perfect in its authenticity. "I know I'm not the guy you probably pictured yourself with," he said as he got down on one knee beside her wheelchair. "I don't wear suits to work or understand quarterly reports. But I love you, Sarah. I love your ambition and your kindness and the way you laugh when you think something is really funny. I love that you see possibilities where other people see problems. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you said yes to that blind date." Sarah said yes before he finished speaking. They married the following spring in a small ceremony on the same rooftop terrace where they'd had their first date. As they exchanged vows with the city lights twinkling below them, Sarah reflected on how wrong she'd been about her future. She had thought the accident had closed certain doors permanently. But sometimes, she realized, life has a way of opening windows you never knew existed. David was right about one thing: he wasn't the guy she had pictured herself with. He was better. He was real and honest and present in ways she hadn't known she needed. And when he looked at her, she saw herself reflected in his eyes exactly as she was. Not broken, not inspiring, just completely and perfectly herself. The blind date that had started as a disaster had become the beginning of everything.